I'm Chef Wendy Brodie with Art of Food with YourTown, and my guest today is wine expert and consultant and dear friend Connie Winters. Welcome, Connie.
Thanks, Wendy. Good to see you again.
We go back a long ways, and I've so admired your knowledge. And being a chef, the wines I've always been a little bit intimidated about, even though I've had classes and all kinds of things. And so you're sort of my strong arm in learning and checking on things and what goes with what in my menus. But I'll let you talk a little bit about your history with Ventana and Bernardus and toot your own horn.
Well, when you asked me to do this, and one of the questions you asked was, when I first became interested in wine. And I probably, until I moved to California, didn't really consume wine much. Grew up on a family farm in Ohio, and my background primarily, before I entered the wine industry, was in construction management, working with Woodman Development, and then I had an opportunity. I wanted to take a little break from that kind of atmosphere, and had an opportunity to go to work for Ventana Vineyards and worked with them for a few years. And then I was approached by the owner of Bernardus Winery to launch that brand into the national market. And so I think at that point, my wine experience went from a minimal amount to really being more exposed to European influence and opportunities to certainly enjoy wines that I hadn't been enjoying and learning more. I think that, I think for people, when they are experiencing wine and they want to know more about wine, I think it's really important for them to really educate themselves, to read as much as possible, to really learn the different varietals. I like to see people experiment with, new wines. I think that you should drink what you like to drink, but I also believe that if you don't move outside of Chardonnay or Cabernet, you really don't experience new things. It would be like eating maybe a hamburger every day.
Yes, yes. Well, with your a little bit of construction background, you could have been creating your own oak barrels and
That's
wine
right.
by Connie's specials. But
I think that that background, is the history and construction and stuff was based on really my educational background. But I really did, I love wine, and I can tell you I read all the time. I still, even though I'm not actively traveling and in the wine industry per se, I continue to read. I continue to experiment with having new varietals. What else can I say? I think if we don't continue to learn and to try new things, then it's not as much fun. I mean, your palate develops. The more that you develop your palate, the more you'll want to taste.
Well, I collect cookbooks, and of course I have a good section of wine books as well. And when I went to cooking school, we had, I don't know whether it was a couple of months of wine education. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you remember the name Ron Batory, but he was a wonderful, wonderful teacher with the California Culinary Academy from years. He was from England and came over, and now I think, last I heard, he was running a girls' school in Bangkok or something. But he was just sensational. But we learned about German wines, we learned about French wines, we learned about Italian wines, and so forth. the world and the first growths, and there were really a way to educate yourself easily. Nowadays, so many countries and different states, before it was kind of just Napa was our U.S. Wine center, and now thanks to Sideways and movies like that, Southern Central California, but all over in Monterey County wine, we're rivaling world wines now.
Yeah, the experience, I think, is also to look outside. I think look outside of our local. I mean, I support our local wineries. I've worked for them. I've promoted them. But I also do experience, the wines of South Africa, the wines from Argentina, French wines, the European wines I love. Recently was exposed to an Austrian rosé that it was absolutely gorgeous. So
Wow.
Given the opportunity to find those wines, I think we have some places on the peninsula that you can shop and where you can experience. I think that for me, one of the things I think we should think about in tasting wines, at least this is how I
Yes.
view it, it's like take your time. And it's the same way whether you are having a glass of wine or you're enjoying a section of a menu, a piece of, like with Kent Torrey that was here earlier with a
Yes.
piece of cheese. Think about what you're tasting. So often we rush through a meal. We're in conversation. We're just eating and drinking, but we're not really focusing on what it took for someone to make that wine, the length of time, what it took for a chef to shop, to prepare, to serve. We really need to appreciate more what goes into a meal and to really savor it. I mean, to rush through a meal, I think, is just a waste of
And that's even better for our nutrition and health,
Yes.
is to eat slowly.
Slowly,
Yes,
yeah.
these are all really lovely things to learn to appreciate
Yeah.
and slow down,
Yeah.
because life is going so quickly.
It's going very
And
quickly.
So I do treasure the opportunity to sit down and
enjoy.
appreciate it. Usually it's been more at the end of the day, and now that I realize how important breakfast is. And,
Well, I was thinking about today too when you had asked me to think about some things, and one of the little things that I remember as growing up on a farm, a family farm, you experience a lot of berries. I thought about on the farm there was this huge hill where we would pick wild strawberries. Okay,
oh,
and or you would go into the barn area and there would be fresh straw. The smell of straw and hay and that kind of earthy soil. So all of those things relate as your experience as a child or your senses are developed. And so that as you grow older, I was somewhere, this goes back a few years ago, and with a varietal that I enjoy, and it's a Cinsault, and it was a rosé. And the minute I tasted that, I went, whoa, right back to the wild strawberries.
wow.
So it's a sensory thing that we develop at a very early age. We just have to think more about it.
Which is, you bring up something that I forgot we did in one of our wine classes that people do now, and you can buy them, is a component tasting.
Yep.
So you can smell all these little different essences and or taste it, and how helpful that really is when you're trying to identify a flavor of a grape. And in my line of work, when I often have been asked to pair wines with food, the winemakers so wonderfully now will give a really descriptive paragraph of like wild cherry flavor and berry and blackberry or earthy, and that gives me food clues as to what to put into my sauce with the meat. I might grind some blueberry or blackberry to give it that little essence to help it pair.
And that does, as you say, if you many times you start with a menu as you do, and then people bring in the wine to have it paired properly with the food. Sometimes you have a special bottle of wine and you want to pair something with it. So knowing the characteristics in the wine is really important, and balancing everything. You know, the wine should be, if it's a light wine, it should be balanced with lighter foods. If it's a big, spicy, heavy, rich, maybe it's a red Zinfandel, you might want to pair that with a steak, you know, a pepper steak or something. But they've got to be in balance, like anything. You want to think about, Wendy, if you're preparing, you know, several things on the plate, you want to think about what else is on that plate when you're balancing off that whole menu. So it's an art, it's a lot of fun, it's a great experience, and I don't think people should ever be intimidated by anyone. You know, I may go and say, well, you know, I smell this, or don't ever be intimidated. Everybody's individual tastes and smells come from a history.
And a little different with all of us.
Very subjective. So we come with our background. We've inherited different things. So I remember the assistant winemaker at Bernardus one time. We had and I still remember it because it's something I pick up. We were tank fermenting Sauvignon Blanc, and it came from a particular vineyard. And in the tank, we were tasting, and the assistant said, "Wow, it reminds me of fresh peas." Well, to him it was fresh peas. To me, my experience took me to the gooseberries that we had on the farm.
Oh.
So to me it was gooseberries, to him it was peas.
Yeah.
So it's all, pairing, it's all very subjective. But it's a lot of fun, and I hope people will, really learn more.
Well, I should have had the glass here next time when you come.
Yeah, I'll bring glasses.
But for the beginner and somebody, we've got a whole new generation coming up, and there is a way to drink wine.
Yeah.
And since you're talking about taking your time, savoring it, describe the best way to pour a glass of wine, how full, what the swirling's all about, what you can see when you swirl, and then how you taste.
I always, I don't think you should, there again, don't rush into anything.
Yes.
When you open a bottle of wine, you pour a little, I will taste every glass of wine before I serve it to anyone. I'm always surprised sometimes in tastings that people, I think about times when I've had a taste of something and I'll go to the person behind the table, "Did you taste this?" No, they didn't taste it. So it could be corked, which it was. So it's important to taste, to have a little bit in your glass, to open the wine up a little bit so that it becomes, you have a little more air to it, and then smell it. I think depending upon the wine varietal, the weight of the wine, some of that I think that you're talking about might be referred to as legs. So that's the viscosity in the wine, so that's a weight. So that's always kind of fun, but most important, you want to really know before you pour a big glass and hand it to somebody or serve it that you've tasted it and it's good, it's fine. So what else can I tell you about that?
Well, no, that's great.
Does that help?
And
Always taste.
I guess too, we know like companies like Riedel will
Yes.
have a glass for every particular style and varietal of wine. But you really ideally shouldn't pour it too full.
I wouldn't
what
even.
would-
I would probably do. For me, I like it probably a third of the glass. I don't even like to go up halfway, and it does depend upon the glass. I think glassware really is important. I'm not a big fan of the glass that has no stem.
Me either.
Yeah,
Me either.
I really do prefer the stem.
You can't swirl
You
it
can't
as
swirl it, and you can't smell it. You can't open it up. I'm sure there's a place for it, and I'm sure there's a place for those little bistro glasses. But there's something about, and it's not being a snob, but there's something very enjoyable about it, and that it would be, to me, it's just like having wonderful food. It's the appreciation of that wine at the table.
Oh,
And really taking, like I said, Wendy, really taking the time to experience it,
Yeah.
to slow it down.
I view it like a tea ceremony, and it's so honorable, and it's not snobbish. It's really about learning, appreciating, and trying to decipher. And what's so interesting is, I think what's intimidated me is from year to year to year, the wines change.
Yes.
And the productions change, and even though they may try and do a very similar formula, it's Mother Nature that is really determining the outcome. And so I just don't know how these wine experts say this is this wine from this field on this year. It's a miracle
Well,
to
it
me.
is interesting because I do recall, and I guess probably more so at Bernardo, since it came from the very start of a very long, wonderful experience with the owners there. The very first vintage, and people would be drinking it, and all of a sudden you'd be out of that vintage and you'd be into the next one. And they'd always say, oh, this is not as good as the last one. But it's, there again, not as good. By the time they got, maybe a few months into that vintage, oh, this is wonderful. Wine evolves. It's a living, breathing thing, and it does evolve.
On that note, we have to continue this wonderful experience back at home.
Yeah.
And I can't thank you enough, Connie, for joining us today on YourTown. I'm Chef Wendy Brodie. Thank you.
You're welcome. If we're off, I was going to end one thing with you, and it might be gone, but there's a French proverb, and it says, in water, one sees one's own face, but in wine, one beholds the heart of another.
Oh, that's beautiful. Beautiful. Maybe they can weave that in.
It's a good one. It was a good one. Thanks, Wendy.
Oh, God, thank you.
Yes,
Thank
this
you.
was good.